This has certainly been a depressive conference so far. Mike and Sheila, thank you so much for bringing us these perspectives. And of course, it's a pretty bleak picture that you are giving us this morning. And of course, a commentator may ask, how relevant is this for the Norwegian context? And of course, this is a very educated audience, and you know the sector well, and you could say, well, this is happening outside Europe. This is happening in parts of Europe that is far from us, and this is not relevant. I think we are maybe more exposed to some of these pressures and tendencies than we like to think. I think the note that Sheila made about the link between prestige and money is also a very important one for us. We can certainly see the effect of the Matthew principle in the Norwegian higher education system and also for the funding system. We know that from Sweden that some of the most successful researchers, they have money stacked up in bank accounts because they are so successful in winning bids, but they are unable to put these money into work, while other researchers that may also be qualified and have high quality have problems in finding relevant funding. So it's about how the competition work that we also need to perhaps have a look into. I think an important point that Sheila raised is also related to the data issue. And of course, I think this is an area where we have actually gained some ground in Norway about accessibility of data. Recently, we have talked a lot about open publishing and that sort of thing. But access to data is really crucial if we are really to have open science. And luckily, I think we have actually come a bit far in Norway on that issue. Of course, Sheila also had a lot of numbers that she shared with us. And of course, you know, the evidence is there, but of course the interpretations may also be open for discussion. And I think one of the issues where I think I might disagree with you, Sheila, is that when you describe the co-publishing patterns, for example, between higher education researchers, private industry, yes, of course, that can be an evidence of academic capitalism, of private money coming in, but it can also be an indication that there are new types of collaboration coming into play in higher education, which may also be good for the sector. So there are different interpretations here that you could make on some of these numbers. To Mike, thank you for pointing out this distinction between knowledge societies and the knowledge economy. It is, of course, a huge paradox that in a time where we talk about the knowledge society, you know, we distrust knowledge more than ever before. So it's a huge paradox. And you advocated for slow science. And of course, you were unable to understand the presentation made by the minister this morning. But she was actually talking about the new long-term plan for higher education and research in Norway. And the interesting paradox there is, of course, that while politicians apparently now see the need for long-term planning, it's very hard to see how researchers are exposed to some of the same conditions. Because while you could really understand and appreciate the need for a long-term planning in research, you know, how does that translate into the life of the individual researcher? How can the individual researcher have the ability to do long-term planning when everything is up for grabs in numerous competitions? And I think what you noticed also regarding how researchers spend their time is crucial here. And we see that Norwegian academics, as many academics in the rest of Europe, work long hours. if we start to look into how this time is divided, we can see that, on average now, I think the latest numbers from NIFU is that only 30% of that time is spent for research. It should have been much more. So we really do have a problem. And I would love to take you up on discussing this right now, I think. Yeah? Yes? Thank you.
Thank you. And then we'll ask Jennings and Slaughter to come up here. Thank you very much, Bjørn. And you invited them into the discussion. They have, I think they should come up here at once. Yeah, okay, Sheila first, of course. We are together with gentlemen. Would you react, actually? Sheila, you had some, he challenged you on something.
Yes, he did. Well, it wasn't really a challenge, but it was an insight that good things can happen as well as bad things in terms of the numbers. And that is certainly true. And what I have seen, however, I mean, I think good things can happen, but it does mean that academics are less in control, as peers of what they're doing. And it's usually for a project that has relevance for industry or corporations to some degree, okay? Because else they wouldn't be doing it. And so I regard that as an encroachment on our ability to choose freely what we want to do. The other thing is that I've been doing a lot of work on university industry research partnerships, which there isn't a lot of data on because there's no data source. And this is based out of my trustee studies. This in particular was MIT. And the things the research partnerships do are amazing. And it's often really big problems, right? It's not like little things. It's like, the Defense Department and Raytheon and a tribe of scientists, and they're figuring out how to run AI and robots for the future that will make all of us not have jobs. But, and they say, well, this benefits everyone. But in fact, that's not what's happening in these countries. It tends to stay within the circle of elite universities, the benefits, and we have increasing wealth inequality. So I would like it to be the other way, but when you look, I don't see it so clearly.
You're convinced?
Well, no, but I think when this is also a conference about research quality,
yeah.
and clearly we can see
research.
And I think there is a distinction also between how the knowledge is spread and diffused in society and research quality as quality as such. And I think my point were only that what we can see coming out of some of these collaboration is actually high quality research.
Yes, I'm not denying that.
And of course you could debate then how is this diffused to the greater and is spread to the rest of the society. That's an important issue. But if we take the research quality issue as such, I think there are also good things to be gained from these sort of collaborations.
I agree with you on that.
But the issue isn't the existence of high quality research. I mean, we have every reason to be proud of what we do. We have every reason to say from the rooftops, we work very hard, we work very well. But we can't be complacent because in our experience, it's getting harder to keep control of high quality research because of the constant demand to look for citations and to reference. In other words, you're being told you're being judged in your university or in your research institute because you haven't published a paper since when? What's wrong with waiting longer to do a groundbreaking paper? We know there's nothing wrong, but society is increasingly demanding short term. They want to see your output in quantum terms as opposed to quality terms. That's why we have to assert the primacy of quality. Not because we are defensive about it, not because we think that there is any doubt about our quality, but because we recognize that quality is under threat by short-termism. That's the challenge, it seems to me.
Yeah. Somebody tweeted while you were speaking that you are wishing for the good old times.
Yes.
There were many, many people like Newton who sat under a tree and they never actually realized anything. So,
well, if I'm honest, I don't believe Newton sat under a tree in the first place. Okay, so I'm entitled to take a little bit of license. And you're absolutely right. There is no point in looking back to a golden age to replicate it. But there is every point in looking back to a previous time to point out the contradictions that exist in current governments and institutional thinking. It is, of course, it's facile to say that you should have time to sit in a garden, but it's not facile to say that you should have time to think. If you're going to do higher quality research, you can't always be rushing to the podium or rushing to the publisher. You have to be indulged to start, and I think our job is to say that we are deserving of being indulged because, as I said, we are not dossers. We are hard workers, and we do best when we're allowed to do it in our own time, taking time and getting it right.
I think an issue which I really liked that you picked up on in your presentation is the importance of education here. And again, coming back to the minister's presentation this morning, and also about slow science and how can we develop knowledge societies, I think it's again kind of interesting that while politicians again see the need for long-term planning when it comes to raise the quality of education, well, again, it is about competition. One could ask that, or I could at least raise the question, wouldn't Norwegian higher education, if we really want to lift the quality of the education, is it more competition that is really needed, or should we try to lift the whole sector at once in some kind of a long-term plan? I do see that there is a mismatch there between the thinking of the need for long-term thinking at the macro level, and again the short-term thinking that we at the micro level have to be adapted to when we are supposed to implement the long-term thinking. It's a paradox that I don't see resolved in the plan. So
I guess you expect some supporting answers here.
Of course.
Sheila?
Well, I don't know that long-term planning works very well in most cases, and I believe that's what scholarly studies show about it to begin with, although I don't want to say don't plan at all. I don't have a good answer to that even particular paradox.
But I think we're probably all agreed that if we could find an entity that we knew to be neoliberalism, and if we could put it there, we'd all shoot it. Because we keep complaining about this thing, neoliberalism, what it does to us. But this is, one of the thoughts is that this fanatical support for competition's sake, we need to say, competition is good. Yeah, don't knock it. But what about collaboration? And, you know, so it is, to some degree, a battle of the bigger ideas. And I think, if we're honest, we have been losing that battle in recent years. It has been more about short-termism, number of citations, competing for finance, competing for budgets, more administration, more office-bound work as opposed to research work. Yes, it is. But we can't allow that trend to continue without saying the counter-argument as to why it is counterproductive. And if this means putting forward myths such as Sir Isaac Newton. Well, they do it to us all the time. The neoliberals are good at myths too, you know, so let's not forget.
You know, I find disturbing what competition seems to be doing in terms of retracted articles and, you know, sort of being overly expansive in your interpretations. But the instances of fraud I find really disturbing. And, you know, maybe there always was fraud and we just don't know about it. But
yes, listening to you, actually, we have this feeling that everything evil in this world came with Trump, that there is a lot worse now than it was before. But, for example, it probably was a lot of fraud before.
There probably was.
And it was much more closed, people didn't see it. Probably.
Well, certainly.
Some people feel that you were kind of giving too pessimistic when you are,
Well, I don't. There's probably was a lot of fraud before, but I don't think that makes it any better. What it is doing is saying that somehow in academe, the drive to be successful and to compete and to get the biggest stuff has a lot of bad consequences. And some of the things happened earlier under George Bush and things like that, but people weren't able to monitor to the same degree that they do now with big data. In fact, there's even, and this I read in The Economist, so I have no citation or anything like that, that they have now something like some program, some AI program that will check your statistics, and you could do it currently or retrospectively to see if they are willfully misinterpreted. And wouldn't that be an amazing thing, for good or bad? I don't know, but that's the sort of counting things and evaluative things that are on the horizon. On the other hand, I do think science has accomplished wonderful things, both in the social sciences and in the physical sciences. And I don't think we talk enough about, other than the STEM fields, which is something else I would like to remedy at some point, because I think as much things of these activities go on, like in business schools, which in the US now have more sociologists and sociology departments, and we just tend not to discuss what happens in those areas. So, yes.
If you don't have anything to add, or Bjørn, yeah?
No, I mean, I think we need to bring this debate also from the macro level down to the micro level. I think the topic for the conference here today, quality, creativity, risk, is an important one. But we can't take that debate at macro level. I mean, all these issues, at some point they end up at the micro level, inside the university, and how we organize work inside university. And I think, and I look forward to the debate also later today, because I think that is an important part of the discussion, because not all problems can be solved at macro level, and there is a responsibility here for what does institutional autonomy really mean for trying to solve some of these big issues.
Yes. Can I just very briefly on risk? Everybody supports risk, except when it goes wrong. That's not supporting risk, and that's why I say we must assert the right to fail. Because if we don't endeavor and risk failure, well then, so it's very easy for our governments and politicians to say, of course, I take a risk every 4 years when I go for election. I'm all in favor of risk. That is just facile. To be really in favor of risk, you have to allow for the consequences of risk. And that's the space that we need. And that's why government by our peers is so important. Because if I'm a sociologist, if I'm a nuclear physicist, if I'm a chemist, nobody understands what I'm doing and the risk I'm taking in it. than a sociologist, a chemist, or a nuclear physicist. That's why I think it's important. And I've described that as a battle that we have lost. And I think we have substantially lost that battle in the last 15, 20 years. We rarely talk about majority control by academics in institutions anymore. We have ceded that ground because we were accused of being elitist. We need to be careful. Maybe we was a bit elitist, but there's always a balance.
That was a good concluding remark, Mark. Thank you very much to the three of you.
Tack.